in casualties and damage to residential infrastructure. We're concerned about reports of population movement as men, women and children are fleeing in search, safety and protection. And I think it's fair to say that hundreds of thousands of people are on the move in Ukraine and out of Ukraine as we speak. I want to reiterate the statements made by the Secretary General that the UN and its humanitarian partners, all those people I have the fortune to work with, are committed to continue and indeed to expand our presence. We have not left, we are not leaving Ukraine. Obviously, our people there are bunkered down at the moment, but we're expanding our presence in Ukraine and scaling up efforts to help meet the needs of people affected across that country. And we have been doing this for some weeks. In the alarming phase of escalation, the safety and security of all our staff and their dependents is a top priority. We're currently facilitating the temporary relocation of non-essential UN staff and eligible family members within Ukraine for the purpose of their security and safety. There are no plans at the moment to relocate our staff outside the country, but we'll continue, obviously, to evaluate the developing security situation. We are bringing together our partners. We have set up an interagency operations center in Geneva, which is already in existence. I will be going there over the weekend. We will be launching an appeal which will bring together the needs for the region outside Ukraine under the leadership of UNHCR, High Commissioner Filippo Grandi, and the needs for people inside Ukraine. And we'll be putting that out within a few days, and we'll launch it indeed in Geneva, as is customary. Yesterday, the Secretary General announced a $20 million allocation from the UN's Central Emergency Response Fund to scale up immediate response. And we need this because we're now beginning to realize that the scale of need in these very, very extraordinary circumstances is going to be of the highest. We're going to need to use cash for the delivery of assistance, and we're going to need to use that cash safely. We're looking, obviously, at the impact of sanctions on our operations, and we're doing this in coordination with the International Committee of the Red Cross. We're going to look to, and we've had calls with and meetings with we're going to look to the generosity of donors, of member states, of donors more generally, to mobilize the financial resources that we will be outlining in that appeal that will come through in a few days from now. And perhaps the most important point that I want to make is that we need the safe, unimpeded access and protection of our humanitarian workers and the deliveries that they will be doing, that they will be resuming as soon as the security allows it, to all areas of Ukraine affected by conflict. Our humanitarian response, as you know, is guided by four simple but profound principles: humanity, neutrality, operational independence, and impartiality. And I'd leave you with just one comment from my colleague and friend David Beasley, the Executive Director of the World Food Programme, who was telling us just this morning that 50% of the World Food Programme's wheat for the world's programme around the world comes from Ukraine. The fallout from Ukraine in terms of costs, in terms of wheat, in that example, is something that, that is spooling out before us, and we have yet to see where this will lead. Thank you very much. Thanks,
Thank
Stefan.
you, Martin. Ibtisam.
Hi, on behalf of the United Nations Correspondent Association, thank you for the briefing. My name is Ibtisam Azim from Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. My question is first about the financial situation. How much money approximately we're talking about, and about the access and safety of your staff. Are you seeing any signs that worrying you? And could you please elaborate on the issue of the numbers? Like you said that probably are going to increase the numbers. If you could go more on that. Thank you very much.
Shall I? Yes, great. The financial situation. Well, right now, as we speak, and I was talking to agencies in Geneva this morning, we're trying to put those numbers together for this appeal that will come out. But it's going to be well north of $1 billion. It's going to be for a limited period, for a 3-month period. So we will see the numbers, the financial, the figures quite soon. As soon as we have solid base for that, we'll put it out. Quickly going to your last question, I'll come back to safety of staff, that this appeal, of course, will be launched very quickly. We need to get it out quickly. I had a meeting of the Interagency Standing Committee. That's the leaders of all humanitarian agencies, as you know, globally, yesterday, all of whom said we need to get that appeal out because we need to frame the nature of the need in Ukraine as subsequent to these events. We need it quick. But it's going to be based on projections, based on past experience, but based on projections. And I don't right now have a number of the people in need, which is going to be part of that. But I can tell you that even before this, we had 3 million people, as I said earlier, in need already in the Donbass. And we were anticipating further displacement up to another 1.8 million or more. But I would prefer not to be quoted on a figure for people in need for that appeal yet. It's being sorted out. Safety of staff, so far as I know, God forbid, but so far all our staff are safe, including those down in southeast in the Donbass area, both sides of the contact line, right in the heart of this hot war. We are relocating staff inside Kiev to places of safety and security. They, like all the citizens of that city this morning, spend a lot of time this morning in the shelters. They're still very much in contact with us. We have daily, hourly contact. Just now, Osnat Lubrani, the resident coordinator, the humanitarian coordinator, was on the call with the Secretary General. So they're there, but they're keeping safe until the moment that they can get out and start to deliver assistance. But even while keeping safe, they're able to work together with the agencies, and particularly local NGOs, local partners, as we like to call them, who will be the key method of delivery of assistance, because they will know the numbers of people who need help in these coming months. So that's going on. It's a planning process of the highest importance while we are ready to move out and to deliver again.
Thank you. Pam Falk?
Thank you, Undersecretary General. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. You mentioned that some of the staff, and just now again, are bunkered down a bit in Ukraine. Can you explain how, or if not quantify, at least explain how much of the aid deliveries are being delayed because no one can move things around? And second, looking at the pictures, looking from colleagues who are there, how much more, even if you can't put numbers on it and it's right in the middle, do you expect? I mean, obviously with the launch of the funding, you have some idea, but do you expect it to grow monumentally because of this? Thank you. The need, that is. Thank you.
Sure. On the delay, well, so far it's day 2 of the, this particular situation. So this is not yet a factor. And we don't know, like none of us know, when we're going to get back to make sure those convoys can move, those deliveries can be made. Of course, using cash, which goes directly to beneficiaries, and we, as you know, we've been using that in Yemen, for where I spent the last few years, quite extensively. Cash can be delivered by the internet, of course. So you don't need physical movement. So we don't anticipate at the moment any disturbance or delays of humanitarian supplies to those in need. We're watching it very carefully. Yes, we do anticipate very significant increases in numbers. I think, as you know, you've seen the situation much more than I. Just the extent of movement of Ukrainians is enough of a starter question for the increase in need. It's not the only question, because displacement, of course, is going to be a huge issue inside and outside the country. But we also anticipate interruptions of basic services, interruptions of pensions. We have yet to see the consequences of where this particular operation is going. And I mentioned this also in the context of other conflicts and crises, where like we did in Afghanistan back in August, September, where you can see pretty clearly some of the outlines of where the situation is going to evolve. But you also do realize, as the days and the weeks go by, that there are some secondary consequences. And I think the wheat figure is one of those. I think we're going to see an increase in prices. We've seen the energy prices going up, and we're concerned about that for the costs of programs in existence in other countries. We're also naturally concerned about that, about the secondary consequences, because we have some big appeals going for 2022. We're going to launch emergency appeals in March for both Yemen and Afghanistan. And we're going to ask donors to be generous. And as you can imagine, in calls that I've been in with some of those key donors, they already are worrying about the impact of what these needs, which are obviously incredibly important and a high priority, are going to have on others. We must not forget the others. We must not forget the world continues to exist and needs continue to be there, and we need to respond properly.
Thank you. Benno, German Press Agency.
Thank you. And the Secretary General Benno Schwinghammer with the German Press Agency.
Benno, if you could just remove your mask when you ask the question.
You talked about the hundreds of thousands of people on the move fleeing in Ukraine already. Can you share more of the knowledge you have about this? Where are these people going? How are they moving? And do you share the United States view of up to 5 million refugees in this conflict?
That's a very good question for Filippo Grandi, as you can imagine. I'm not going to, but I do, because actually I don't know the answer to those questions, and I don't know how much we are going to see in terms of outflow to the neighbouring countries. UNHCR, under Filippo's leadership, is working with the agencies to develop an appeal for that, which will come out with ours we're working on inside Ukraine. It's anybody's guess, frankly, at the moment, to know whether the displacement, how much of the displacement is going to be outside and how much is going to be inside. Because the decisions that, of course, Ukrainian families are taking are decisions which we can't peer into as to whether to move or not. And I guess that's because they're still thinking that one through, and that depends on circumstances. So I'll tell Mr. Grandi of your question.
Edie Lederer, Associated Press.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffiths.
Edie, if you just take off your mask when you ask the question, it's easier to hear. Perfect.
Two questions. First, is it, as you said, nobody knows how long this conflict is going to go on. Is it fair to assume that the United Nations, particularly your office, has done or is doing long-term planning in case it does last for weeks and months? And secondly, in light of the impact particularly on energy prices, which will affect countries like Afghanistan and Yemen, but also donor nations, how concerned are you that this could impact how generous donors can and will be?
Good questions, Edie, as usual. On the second one, we're at the moment doing an assessment of what the secondary impact, as I put it, of the consequence of energy prices and other prices, wheat and others going up, for our humanitarian programs in the world. We are not in the business of doing an assessment of what it looks like for a donor country, but we do keep very closely in touch with them on the scale of their generosity. And I think it's going to be clearly a lot of difficult conversations are going to happen over the next weeks or months. On the planning, it's a very good question. And I had the benefit of a meeting this morning with the Ukrainian permanent representative here, who emphasized to me the need for urgency and immediacy. Act today in terms of humanitarian assistance. I said we are, but we're also, and so we are present, we have not left, we're acting today, we are putting together, however, also, in addition to that, a 3-month appeal. So that is looking at a 3-month process. If the situation changes again, and goodness knows how would we know that that may not happen, we will reprogram, we will come back and we will say this is what's happening. Even if in that 3 months we, God forbid, discover that the need becomes less than we fear, we will also come back and say that the displacement was less, or the needs are less, or the disruption is less, whatever. So we'll go out with the 3-month program, but we will keep a very close eye on seeing how it adapts to day-to-day circumstances.
Thank you. Dulcie?
Yeah, I was just wondering how much contingency planning had you done to anticipate this crisis? Thanks.
Good question. We have done quite a lot of contingency planning, but I've been 45 years dealing with conflicts all over the world, and I'm an older man for it, and I have never seen a situation like this in terms of the parameters of contingency planning. I've been involved in contingency planning in Iraq, in Cambodia, in Yemen, in Syria, in many, many different parts of the world, in very big programs in Afghanistan. Contingency planning for what might or might not happen in Ukraine was of the highest degree of uncertainty. So what we have been doing is imagining possible scenarios, obviously, but what we've also been doing is also looking into the ways to respond to whatever the needs, the level of needs may rise to. That's my reference to cash, for example. We have, with our friends in the agencies, World Food Programme and others, been standing up the logistical support for any operation. We have sent in, both OCHA, my own office, and agencies, sent in experienced staff into Ukraine. We have an experienced deputy humanitarian coordinator going in, hopefully tomorrow, by road. He was deployed a couple of days ago. He served in a similar role in Afghanistan back in the fall. So we built preparedness, but that's different from knowing the future and knowing what your plan looks like. And that's what we're doing right now, is looking at the plan.
Thank you. We're going to take 2 questions from the screen. Abdelhamid and then Maggie. Abdelhamid?
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. This is Abdelhamid Sayan from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Arabi.
Oh, yes, sorry.
I think this conflict will have an impact on the energy prices. News say that the gas prices went up 6 times and the oil prices went about 37%. That will have devastating effect on the poor countries. They might not meet their demands for their public, so that might be more miseries and more tragedies we will see in the next few months. Are you aware of these developments, and how are you going to deal with it, sir?
Well, right now, we're focusing on Ukraine this week and next. We're going to focus on Ukraine, where the crisis is at its highest. As I said earlier, we're looking into the possible consequences of economic shocks, energy prices increasing. I didn't give any figures on those rises, but we're looking into what that might do for our current existing humanitarian response plans for 2022. And as you know, that's already a $41 billion a year set of programs in various different countries. But clearly, one of the aspects, as you know better than me, of the United Nations is it's present in all countries, and staff in all countries will be looking very, very carefully at this. And other colleagues inside the Secretariat are looking already at the issue of shocks and how they may reverberate out into, as you're rightly pointing out, possible increases of poverty and destabilization.
Thank you. We'll take two more questions. Margaret and then Stefano. Maggie?
Hi, Mr. Griffiths. Thanks so much for doing the briefing. If you could give us any more information on numbers of displaced and refugees. I know it's really, really fluid, but I've seen various numbers circulating in the press. So if you could sort of give us some sort of, other than I heard you say hundreds of thousands are on the move, but I just sort of want a number that we can all agree upon for now to kind of use in our reporting, basically. And if you could just talk to us a little about the logistics of what's involved in your aid response, because the country is on the move and multiple cities are under attack. And how do you, I mean, it seems a bit worse than some of the other situations you've been dealing with recently. Can you just give us, because it's very active at the moment, can you give us an idea of how, like, talk us through the logistics? And do you have any concerns about coordinating with the Russians after the problems you had with them in Syria and the deconfliction areas? Do you see them, are you afraid of any problems, really, working with them in Ukraine? Thanks.
I'm not going to be drawn on the numbers, and Filippo Grandi is really careful with us on this. I totally understand, Maggie, your need for one to pin that. But it's really too early to tell, and just it's so fluid that we don't want to. UNHCR doesn't want to give out numbers which then are either too risibly low or too alarmingly high. We know that there are outflows. I think as of some hours ago, there were 50,000 people who had gone into Poland and 20,000 into Moldova. I think those are UNHCR numbers, IOM numbers. But I'm afraid I'm going to not be very helpful to you on that. How to deliver? I mean, Ukraine is different, obviously, from Afghanistan, Somalia, and so forth. And in some ways, they may give us some advantages. Many of the people who are leaving, for example, fleeing now, are people who are going with resources to other places, who are not in immediate urgent need that you would see very differently in Yemen or Somalia, where I was supposed to be this week. The delivery of assistance to those in need, as I said earlier, are going to be partly to those who are displaced, but also partly those who remain in place but need help. And we'll be working, the method, to answer your question, is to work through local partners, the many, many, many local organizations, NGOs, faith-based organizations. That's why yesterday, when I had this interagency standing committee meeting, we had the big international NGO and national NGO networks present. They are the ones who know the people in their communities and know where the need will be highest and how to reach those people safely with money, if that's possible, and with goods in kind, if that's necessary. As you know, we deal with any and all authorities necessary for the protection and delivery of humanitarian assistance. And indeed, that includes, in this case, the Russian Federation, and I have had conversations myself this week with them, we will be needing to establish some kind of notification system to allow for the deliveries of assistance. And I'm assured, and I believe that we should be able to do that. But it's too early for us to. I mean, it's 2 days, right, or day and a half. It's too early for us to say exactly how we're going to deal with who at this point, because we don't know. Just like all of us don't know what may happen tomorrow. But we're ready, and the principle of humanitarian assistance, and the one that I have lived by myself for so many years, is to work with any and all people who can help for that safe and principled delivery of assistance.
Thank you. Last question, Stefano Vaccara.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Griffith. Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York. My interest is more, I mean, of course, relief is important to give goods, to give food. But my question is about your role, the UN role at the moment in Ukraine as a witness of what's happening. I mean, is your personnel there, is it ready to tell the world what it's saying if human rights are crushed? We've been watching now this morning videos where already you can see that. So are you giving instructions to your personnel to have also this role? And if did you have contact with the Russians, and in this case also Ukrainian authority, about this role that the UN can have in this moment in Ukraine?
I think what you're talking there is about human rights monitoring, not humanitarian. And my lane is humanitarian, not human rights. And I fiercely defend that line. It's important to keep us in our lane because we have different principles. But there are, I want to add, to answer your question, that there are human rights missions in Ukraine. They've been there for many years because of the conflict in the southeast. They remain there. I believe that I understand that the High Commissioner for Human Rights has issued a statement today of concern about certain arrests of protesters, if I understand it. So you can be damn sure that they will do their job under these circumstances as well. The humanitarians, my colleagues, we will also be clear when we see infringements of international humanitarian law, which is different. We'll also be clear in our advocacy, which includes direct contact, to answer another part of your question, in our advocacy with all those who can help us get the aid to the people in need. And, you know, we do this all over the world, as you know. I mean, this is not new. This is a story that has been part of my life all these many years, and a story that's been the part of all our colleagues. So we're ready in Ukraine to do that, and we're ready to stand as witness to humanitarian issues and humanitarian needs. And that's why, if I may, just to round up, that's why I think launching this appeal is going to be an important moment of statement of possible need. And we'll answer some of the questions that you have about scale and numbers. And I hope that we'll be able to do that, launch that very early next week in Geneva. Thanks a lot.
Great. Martin, thank you very much. I hope to see you soon again for further updates, but thank you for taking the time. Okay. And now I'll go on with the
thank you.
The rest of the world.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Cheers, Martin. Thank you. All right, thank you. Secretary General will be traveling over the weekend. He will be going to Geneva, where on Monday he will deliver remarks at the opening of the 49th regular session of the Human Rights Council. Later, he will take part in a press conference to launch the new report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, titled Climate Change 2022, Impacts, Adaptation, and Vulnerability. While in Geneva, he will also have a series of bilateral meetings. We expect him back here on Monday afternoon. And there's also a chance that he may appear in front of you later this afternoon at the Security Council stakeout. We will keep you posted on that. Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the head of our peacekeeping operations, is in the Central African Republic today, where he began a 4-day visit. He's expected to meet a number of local leaders, including the president, Faustin Archange Touadéra. He will also meet civil society representatives and people directly affected by insecurity in the country. As you may have seen, 4 of our peacekeeping colleagues arrested last Friday were released yesterday. Mankeur Ndiaye, the head of the mission, reiterated that the UN will continue to work to ensure the protection of our personnel and assets in all circumstances, and we're happy they've been released. I want to highlight 3 ongoing humanitarian situations. As I think Martin said, there are other, we are also keeping a close eye on a lot of other places. On Yemen, we want to reiterate our concern about the grave situation in the country, including the impact of the ongoing conflict, which is causing civilian casualties on a daily basis. More than 23,000 people have been displaced since the start of the year, most of them in Hudaydah, Marib, Shabwa, and Taiz governorates. They join more than 4 million men, women, and children who've been displaced across Yemen since the latest escalation got underway in 2015. Aid agencies are doing everything they can to respond to people's needs, but acute funding shortages are threatening the flow of humanitarian assistance. At the start of this year, 2/3 of major UN aid programs had already been forced to reduce or close due to lack of cash. Further cuts are on the horizon if funding is not received. As it is, food rations have already been cut by half for 8 million people. Those people may soon stop receiving food assistance from the UN altogether. We call on all donors to pledge generously at a high-level pledging conference for Yemen, which is scheduled for March 16th, co-hosted by ourselves, the governments of Sweden and Switzerland. We also urge donors to commit funds before the pledging conference to avoid any major disruption in our humanitarian operations. In Afghanistan, as we had told you, I think a group of 8 senior emergency experts from UN agencies and international NGOs have been in the country. Today, they called for urgent support to life-saving humanitarian action in Afghanistan after a 5-day mission to the country. The emergency experts said they witnessed an enormity of human suffering in Afghanistan, but that they also saw humanitarian organizations able to scale up operations despite massive operational constraints, including the ongoing banking and liquidity crisis. According to our humanitarian colleagues, more than 24 million people, that represents 59% of the Afghan population, now require life-saving assistance in the country. That is a staggering 30% increase since 2021. The Afghan humanitarian response plan this year, which is our largest humanitarian appeal ever launched for a single country, calls for $4.44 billion to provide aid to over 22 million people. It's only 13% funded. And also on Afghanistan, a quick note to say that the head of UNICEF, Catherine Russell, just concluded a 3-day trip to the country. In the statement, Ms. Russell noted the streets of Kabul, scores of very young children dart in and out of traffic, chasing cars and asking for money. In a hospital in Kandahar, she saw emaciated babies lie motionless, two to a bed, too weak to even cry, amid a spike of cases of severe acute malnutrition. More on their press release. On Ethiopia, the conflict in the Afar region continues to develop displacement. The conflict in the Afar region continues to cause displacement, which worsens humanitarian needs. Regional authorities estimate that hundreds of thousands have been displaced by fighting in recent months, including some 200,000 people living in areas that are hard for humanitarian workers to reach. Humanitarian response is scaling up to accessible areas in Afar, but still remains far too insufficient. Assessments have been found priority needs for food, protection for children, and health. Humanitarian assistance also continues in Amhara region. More than 6.8 million people have received food assistance in the past 2 months. including over 230,000 that have been assisted by ourselves and NGO partners in the past week. Some areas near the boundary with Tigray, however, remain inaccessible for humanitarians. In the Tigray region itself, we, along with our humanitarian partners, are continuing to scale back operations due to lack of supplies, lack of fuel, lack of cash. No relief convoys have reached Tigray since mid-December, and we are now at the end of February. During the past week, we, along with our partners, have managed to airlift some 47 metric tons of medical supplies to Tigray, including antibiotics, medicines for malaria and diabetes. But as you know, airlifts cannot replace truck convoys in terms of volume and cost. However, lack of fuel remains a major setback in Tigray as an obstacle for dispatching supplies to health facilities throughout the region. Just a quick note that you will have seen that Geir Pedersen, our envoy for Syria, briefed the council this morning. He said militarily front lines remain unshifted, but we still see all the signs of an ongoing hot conflict. Any of a number of flashpoints could ignite a broader conflagration, he warned. Mr. Pedersen said we have now set a date for convening the seventh session of the small body of the Syrian-owned, Syrian-led, UN-facilitated Constitutional Committee, and that is March 21st. Joyce Msuya, the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, also briefed the Security Council on the humanitarian situation in Syria. She said the world is failing the people of Syria. Syria now ranks as one of the world's 10 most food insecure countries, forcing families to pull children out of school or use child marriage as a coping strategy. And a quick COVID update from Vietnam, where our UN team, led by the resident coordinator, the acting resident coordinator, Rana Flowers, continues to support the authorities in health and socioeconomic response recoveries due to the pandemic. The team and authorities have trained healthcare workers, provided health and nutrition services for pregnant women, mothers, and their children, provided water, sanitation, and hygiene supplies to schools and health centers. The team has also supported the economic recovery of women in micro and small enterprises. Vietnam has achieved the goal of vaccinating 100% of the targeted population, that's people 18 or above. Of all vaccines landing in Vietnam, over 51 million doses were received through the COVAX facility. And just to round up this note, on a happy note, which small country, which country small in size, with a very nice beachfront, has paid its budget dues in full?
What continent? There's a lot.
Monaco. 52. We thank our friends in Monaco for that payment. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. A couple of follow-up questions. On Ukraine, has the Secretary General been speaking to any Russian or Ukrainian officials? And while he is in Geneva, do you expect him to hold any talks on the Russian invasion of
I think we have to see who's in Geneva and what we are doing, what the program will be, the actual program will be once he gets there. So we will keep you updated on that. Well, I think as Mr. Griffiths told you, he spoke to the Ukrainian ambassador. The Secretary General had been in touch with Ambassador Nebenzia, I think, a couple of days ago, but nothing new to report.
And on Ethiopia, are all of those trucks still waiting to get into Tigray?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had a truck convoy since mid-December.
Could you get us a number of how many trucks are waiting to get in?
Will do.
Thanks.
Okay. Yes, Lenka.
Thank you, Stefan. Follow-up, and just to confirm, the Secretary General spoke with Foreign Minister Lavrov on February 14, but has he spoken to Putin at all within the past months or something?
He has not.
And one more question, please. Would he like to go to Moscow, or has he requested the meeting?
I think, excuse me, as he said, his good officers are available. All the parties involved know that. Benno and then Stefano.
Thank you. Did the Secretary General lose trust in Russia after constantly lying about starting a war and then actually doing it?
I think the Secretary,